Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Andy Seymour, and I'm here today for our Tips and Tricks GP 2016 webinar. So what I'll do is just spend the next sort of 20-25 minutes running through some of the key features that we'd like to highlight within GP 2016. There are a number of others, but these are ones we've sort of identified as things that customers typically have asked about or are interested in, shown some interest. So we're sort of focusing on these for the moment. There are a few others, and there is an article by Microsoft that highlights all of the various components. Obviously, some of them include things like payroll and things that we may not be quite so interested in the UK. So what I'll do is I'll just run through a little PowerPoint first. Don't worry, I'm not going to drive you nuts with PowerPoint. Literally, I'm just going to highlight the four key areas today. So we want to talk a little bit about the web client, and in particular the fact that we can now use HTML5. Just talk a little bit about that and what that actually means. New feature within SmartLists, SmartList Designer, the ability to now import and export SmartLists. So extra features and functionality around SmartLists and SmartList Designer. Talk about BI, in particular, not in any great depth. Power BI, that's a big product in its own right, but in particular the integration with Power BI and Dynamics GP and the integration with the home page. Get your analytics all on a dashboard in one place. And just finish off a small sort of useful feature that's been added into the workflow side. Workflow has been obviously added within GP 2013 onwards, and obviously a lot of features and benefits being added into workflow and the workflow engine. Now that that's part of Dynamics GP, it's a lot simpler and easier to use. So we'll just highlight a couple of new features in there that seem to be quite useful. Obviously at the end we'll use the chat window so that you can post any questions. I'll try and answer them there and then. If I can't, then obviously we'll make a note of them and get back to you. And obviously afterwards, if there are any other questions, please do email. If we use sales@nolanbusinesssolutions.com for today, and then we'll find somebody who can answer those questions for you if indeed it doesn't end up in my inbox. Okay, so enough of me waffling on. Let me swap screen, so hopefully you'll now be able to see my desktop. And what we're going to start with is just showing a little bit around HTML5 and the web client. So one of the things that GP brought out the web client back in GP 2013 and 2013 R2. Now the thing with that particular release was that it was dependent on a little plugin called Silverlight, or a development arena called Silverlight, that was Microsoft's native development arena. And we found obviously that didn't actually work in all browsers and very much was built around an Internet Explorer and a Microsoft platform. And indeed, as we know, in this day and age, people want to connect using any device, any operating system. So that needed to change. And I'm pleased to say that HTML5 is a language with which works in pretty much any browser, certainly all the popular key ones. And indeed, with HTML5, Dynamics GP Web Client will also now work in there. And I guess one of the key protagonists is things like Safari and using iPads with Dynamics GP. That will now become possible. Okay, so just to show it's multi-browser and we're not using Internet Explorer, I'm just going to start off with my little Google Chrome example. Unfortunately, I haven't got the iPad, but if I log in using Chrome, you'll see what I mean. So I'm just going to launch my web client. So I've got my sign-in screen. I'm just going to log in using my demo administrator account. Try and remember the password correctly and type it in. So what you'll also notice with this particular login is using my demo administrator, I've actually set this user up as a web Active Directory type user. So it won't actually ask me for a separate login like you'd get with the normal SQL login. So this particular user is just a web login. It is a web full user, so I haven't set it as a limited user, so it still has the same functionality. But whilst it's logging in, you should notice it'll just log straight into the test company, the tuning company. And That'll load up. Admittedly, on my laptop, I'm running a virtual machine with Windows 2012 and SQL 2012 and all sorts of things. So admittedly, it's probably a little bit slower than you may experience yourselves using a proper set of infrastructure. And obviously, this is designed to work with things like Windows Azure platform and obviously the whole of the Azure SQL side of things, and indeed with things like Power BI also. Okay, so I've literally logged straight in. And if we can just go to my sales page maybe, just let that refresh. So within Chrome, I can go to data maintenance, and all this normal functionality that I expect with a desktop client is now visible through my Chrome browser. Though it'll be slightly slower than you'd like, but anyway, I'm sure that will be quick for yourselves. So if I click on things like the lookups, you can see that all works in a second when my laptop catches up. So we're getting all of the lookups and all of the functionality, and the data appears. So I'll just select customer, and with the web client, one of the things you'll notice is there are a lot less buttons, and we tend to use the tabs along the top of the windows now, so that we can go between the different forms that would normally exist in the normal client. So that's just a little bit of normal web client. Okay, so if I just close out of those windows a second, and we'll just sign out. That was Chrome. So if I just close out of that one, and we've got Firefox. And log in again, right password. And you'll get the idea. If I put the right password in, I was. Should be more careful with the typing in the password. Close down that browser. Okay, that's just taking a minute to load now, but I think you get the message. You'll see that the URL within the browser is exactly the same as it was in Chrome, and obviously we're using Firefox, and the same would be applicable within Safari. And to that end, while that's loading, I'll just minimize that a second. Now, admittedly, I haven't got an iPad to be able to show you within this webinar session, but what I have done is just done a screenshot from an earlier session. Apologies, when I've sort of expanded it, it's not quite so clear. But as you can see here, you've got your normal iPad Safari browser headings. You can see I've only got 33% free on my battery at the time, and we've just got the normal desktop client there using the project time and expense and the procurement on the home page. So it's not all smoke and mirrors. It truly is multi-browser, and that benefits of HTML5. So that obviously puts a good idea as to how useful that will be with using any device. Obviously Android and mobile devices are included. Okay, so let's just talk about some other items. Now in this example I will log into GP. Let's just close out of the Safari, sorry not Safari, out of my Firefox browser. And I'm going to launch the normal GP 2016 desktop client for this one. And I'm going to log in as the SA user. No particular user, or reason, only because I know that I've set security and the password for the SA user. So just being a little bit lazy. So what I was just going to talk about now is this ability to import and export SmartLists from Designer. So within Dynamics GP, we're all familiar with the SmartList interface. So if I just open that up, SmartList is obviously a very popular tool, and a lot of people use it to pull data from their system. And what SmartList Designer allowed us to do was to then generate our own SmartLists and create them by going straight to the tables within the databases for each of the products. So of course it covered any of the Dexterity products, and you can access those tables. So indeed things like our advanced bank rec and so on and so forth. But also it extended that beyond just the Dynamics GP side of things by going into SQL views. So that brought in a whole load of extra functionality by being able to do cross product. So it could be if you've got other data that's related, maybe in another system with Dynamics GP, so maybe you had a common customer ID or things like that. And then you could build views and then view that within the SmartList as well. Now, one of the things we couldn't do is if someone had come up with a really good SmartList, what you weren't able to do was to export and import it. So obviously if I went off and I created a SmartList, so if I wanted to go ahead and, I don't know, choose my good old RM Debtor Master, down there. So if I wanted to look at the customer name and this sort of thing, I could go and add them into a SmartList. But then that was it. I would save it and no one else would be able to use it. So it could be that somebody else has come up with a really good SmartList, and what I want to do is actually import it. So rather than doing that, what I can do is if I just close out of that window, discard those changes. This time, if I go into the SmartList, into the toolbar at the top, you can see we've got this export import button now. So I was just going to give an example under the sales tab. I wanted to do is create a SmartList that linked my customer details. A little bit of a credit control type situation along with the notes. So within a customer card, if I just go to card sales debtor, just look at the first couple of customers, you'll see that I've set a record level note. So good old Aaron Fitz has got some notes. Just got that. And Adam Park has got some notes. And the next customer, Advanced Paper, they've also got some notes. So what I'm thinking is I'd like to sort of use those notes maybe if I use them as part of a debt collection type situation. So what I wanted to do is just bring a SmartList with the customer card type situation and the notes in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import one I did before, a little bit Blue Peter style, showing my age now. And if I go to my desktop, I'm hoping I'll find my customer notes, an XML file. So if I open that up, choose to import that, it's been imported, and as if by magic what we should have under my sales is now I should have a new folder called Notes, and by clicking on my little favorite there, it runs my notes and I can see the fields that I've added within my SmartList using my designer. So obviously what happened earlier on is I exported that favorite to an XML file, and then that enables me to import that. So very simple, very straightforward, easy to use, but indeed quite useful, especially if people have created some really good SmartLists out there, and we can utilize those for other people. Okay. So we've done the HTML5 client and the import-export from Designer. So one of the other things I just wanted to talk about was Power BI. So I just wanted to minimize that a second. So Power BI is a product from Microsoft. Integrates, well, it's got three sort of layers. It's got a desktop, a web services, and a mobile offering. And it literally is a one-stop shop for pulling in data from all sorts of different sources and creating a dashboard type view. So you can pull in the data sources from different areas. So if I just give you an example of this, if I open up Internet Explorer and go to my favorites, go to Power BI and just sign into my Power BI account, this will work with things like Office 365. So if you have got everything using things like Azure, anything on the Azure platform, everything can be hosted. And let's just remember my password. Different one, sorry. So literally everything can be run from the cloud. So if you had the GP in the cloud and you have Office 365 in the cloud and Power BI in the cloud, that is just typical. It's good old Power BI. Please load. I just love it when you're doing a demonstration that works 10 minutes before you start the webinar and then stops to work, fails to work. Right. So this is my Power BI dashboard. So we can see by looking down the left-hand side here, I've got my workspace. and in particular I've got my dashboards. I'm particularly interested in my customer profitability dashboard. So this is my customer profitability dashboard, and as you can see, lots of facts and figures. I've obviously going overload on all my graphs, but don't panic, I'm not going to use all of them. If we just focus in on these two larger ones in the middle, so we've got my gross margin percent by business unit, that scenario, and another one just underneath it, which is total revenue by month scenario. So there I'm actually logging into the Power BI platform on the cloud, viewing a couple of the scenarios, and what I'd really like to do is to view that within my Dynamics GP desktop. So what I will do is I will just log out, so let me just sign out of that. So what Power BI allows you to do is connect different data sources. So obviously there's a whole bunch of security around this, and you get unique IDs, client IDs. And what I'll do is I'll just highlight the security aspects that need to be configured within Dynamics GP and indeed Power BI. So within the reporting tools setup, there is in fact a new tab, Power BI. So here we've got my Power BI URL defined, which is where I was earlier on, and then you can see I've got this unique client ID. Now that has been generated using this link here, and what that link is, it takes us into registering a client app. So I've had to register Dynamics GP as a client app. That then gets a unique identifier, and then that unique identifier is applicable to us or to the organization, and within Power BI you can further restrict access to that as well. So that's just a little bit of configuration that's needed primarily, both obviously in Power BI and within the Dynamics GP. And then to use it, it's just a case of going to our desktop. So in the home page, you'll notice we've now got these Power BI options. And then in my selection criteria, once I've turned on that pane, and what you'll notice is it then just quickly, I don't know if you noticed that, it was logging into Power BI. So when I talked about my dashboards, we were talking about the customer profitability, and I believe they're right down the bottom. So my gross margin percent and my total revenue, I'm just going to insert those two, say OK. So obviously those are being read by my Power BI website and the connection I have to them. Let's say OK to that. And just let that refresh, and then if I just expand that, you can see here I've got my gross margin percent and my total revenue. If I expand that one and show that one as well. So we can now see within the desktop. So within Power BI we can add the dashboards, and then we can view them within Dynamics GP as the dashboard. Okay. So that's Power BI, and then we were going to talk about workflow. So as we know, workflow has been introduced probably going back to GP 2013, and they've added to it each release. There's been new features and expanding the features within the workflow. So in this particular example, if we go to Tools, Setup, Company, we've got our workflow options. So we've got our usual workflow calendar and the email message setup, so that within the workflow, if you want to send emails, you can create the messages and then link those to the workflow and to the calendar. And if we go into the workflow calendar, obviously takes into account things like holidays and non-working time, weekends, that sort of thing. But if we go into workflow maintenance, we can see there's a whole series of different workflows now. So obviously the financial workflows, you've got the batch approval, sales, receivables batch approval, purchasing, there's quite a number, and indeed in project we've got the expense reports and timesheets. So in my little example, it's just quite simple and straightforward just to show this. If I choose purchasing, and then what I've done is I've just added a little entry within our vendor approval. So if I expand vendor approval, I've created a little workflow. So under vendor approval, I've highlighted that Andy's the manager, so that's my Active Directory login. And then what I've done is I've just created a step, which is to check supplier details. So within that step, what I've been able to do is to identify, sorry, I need to make that active as well at some stage. So within this workflow step, what I've done is I've gone and chosen that I'm going to check the class that the supplier is in. So going down into that class check step, as a mouthful, I can see that I've set that up. Its startup type is a task, and then what I've done is I've made that conditional, because a couple of the things that they've added is the ability, when you've got, these are two new options for what happens when the step conditions are not met. So what that'll do is highlight that you can either continue to the next step or you can reject. So here in my example it says action is required only when the following condition is met. So I've then put in a condition where vendor master vendor class ID does not contain nothing. So in other words, it's not blank. Then if the condition is not met, then I'm going to reject the workflow. So in other words, all I was trying to do is just to give an example that when setting up and creating suppliers as part of the approval process, we want to make sure that there's a check in there that the supplier has been added to one of the classes, one of the valid classes. So that's just one of those, and then in there I just happen to use one of these two new options within the condition process about continue to next step or reject the workflow, which is those new items that have been added within there. Okay, so that should be nice and straightforward. Obviously workflow, a lot of people are starting to use workflow because it's a lot easier now. So whereas before we're reliant on previous versions, configuring SharePoint and all those aspects, this whole maintenance of workflow within Dynamics GP is certainly much easier. And obviously they're adding to it all of the time. Certainly in the last few versions, since 2013, they've added new features and workflows, and it's certainly an area that seems to be expanding greatly. Okay, so there's my workflow, and let's not bother saving that, so I've got that for the future. And indeed, I think I've come to the end of the key aspects. Unusually for me, that seems to be running reasonably on time. So I guess what I need to do now is check for any questions, see if I can answer any questions. And what I'll be doing is I'll just use the GoToWebinar chat session. So just let me open that up. And I can see then if there are any attendees who have any questions. If you'd like to type them into the chat window, what I can do is I can have a look at those and see if I can answer those on the fly. And if not, we'll try and get back to you. And luckily all of the chat messages are stored as part of the webinar, so we can then refer to those if I needed to. Okay, so I'll just wait for a second and just see if anyone has got any questions, and then I'll try and answer them. Okay, still no questions at the moment. I'm hoping everyone knows how to type in, or I'm hoping I'm not looking at the wrong place, that's for sure. I'm not quite sure what interface you see from your end, but there should be a chat section, so if anyone wants to type anything into that area. Admittedly, I won't be able to hear anyone if they're talking. Admittedly, we're just using the chat window. Right, apologies. I think I'm the one using the wrong area as it happens. There are some questions, so apologies for that. One of the questions is, can you drill down into the Power BI data? Within the window, I don't believe you can within the Dynamics GP desktop. It depends on the presentation of the data, but certainly in Power BI you can set up the drill down feature. I don't believe that's possible within the desktop, though admittedly I haven't tried it, so I will double check that, so apologies for that one. So can we drill down? Let me check that one. We've got another question, admittedly a little bit unrelated, but related to Smart Connect. Any enhancements for Smart Connect for 2016? Again, not that I'm aware of. Smart Connect isn't necessarily directly related to the version of Dynamics GP. Admittedly, they do bring out features and enhancements. This is a product from E1. And certainly the E1 website normally highlights any new features that are brought out, but it isn't necessarily tied to a Dynamics GP version. So certain versions will work as they bring out new features. Certainly, thanks for that question, Suzanne. We can double check, and I know that's something that you're obviously interested in. Oh, sorry, another question about drilling down to the. Oh, sorry, Des, it's you again, because I wasn't looking in the right place. So let me double check that. I don't think my example. Let me just go and see. Should we go and try this on the fly? Let me just move that. So if I click on it. Okay, hold on, let's do that. Allow pop-ups. No. Okay, sorry, there's that. It may not be the best example. I'm not sure if it's got the drill down feature within that particular example that I selected. So maybe something we have to take away with us and check on that one. So apologies for that. Okay, so is there any other questions? Let's have a look. I don't think there's any new ones cropped up recently. I'll just hang on 1 second. We've still got a few attendees. So if there's any others of you that have got any questions, please let us know. Okay, so that looks like it's been a few minutes. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so what we'll do is Des and Suzanne will get back to you on those items, but thank you very much for your time today, and you're taking your time out of your busy schedules to have a little look, and I'm hoping some of you will find these features useful and be able to use them going forward when you get on to GP 2016 or indeed beyond. So thank you very much for your time today, ladies and gentlemen, and we look forward to getting you back for another webinar in the near future, anytime soon. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.